Did you know with just a little bit of flour and some seasoning, you could make Seitan? Not that kind of Seitan. Seitan, spelled S-E-I-T-A-N, is a meat substitute. It's using flour and then separating the flour into its gluten and its starch, pulling the starch out of the flour and leaving a gluten ball. That gluten ball is called Seitan. And it's used to make a variety of meat substitutes. You can use the gluten ball to make more solid meat substitutes like a beef substitute, a chicken substitute, a variety of sausages. I've seen people make ham rolls, roast beef. There's a variety of things. And the only thing that's different once you have that gluten ball is the seasonings that's used and the way it's prepared afterwards. But that's used to make a variety of meat substitutes. We'll also be using the starch. Normally the starch gets separated or washed out and goes down the drain. You can use it and dry it, and starch noodles are made from the starch. So you can make noodles with it, but you can also make a variety of other meat substitutes. And today we're going to be making bacon, but you can make bacon, you can make cold cuts. There's all sorts of things that you can make using the starch as well. And that is determined by how they're seasoned. But today we're going to be making a pepperoni sausage out of the gluten, and we'll be making bacon out of the starch. So let's get that started. Okay, to prepare our Seitan, I use the same recipe no matter what it is that I'm making, whether I'm making pepperoni or salami or even a bologna. If I'm going to make any kind of a Seitan product, I always use the same base, and the base is 6 cups of all-purpose flour to 2 cups of water. And you can either make that a larger or smaller ratio using the same 2 to 6. So I'm going to stir in my water just to get it started. And then what we're going to have to do is knead this for about 5 minutes until it turns into a semi-sticky dough ball. It's not going to be very sticky. It's not going to be a messy dough. And I'll show you what we have. But I'm just stirring this up. And then we'll dump the dough ball onto our work surface, and I'm going to knead it for about 5 minutes. Okay. Now that I got that started, it'll make it a little bit easier. I'm going to use my hands and try to bring all this together into a dough ball. And then once we have the dough ball, I can take it out of this pan or this bowl and put it on our work surface and really start kneading it. That's when I start the timer. Once it leaves the bowl and I'm kneading it on the table, I knead it for about 5 minutes. Seems to be a good rule of thumb. I guess it all depends on how well you can knead the dough. It may take a little bit longer, or it may take a little bit less once it comes together, and I'll show you what it looks like when it's done. Okay, most of this is come together with the balls. And now what I'm going to do is just move this here, dump out the bowl. Okay, and then I'm going to try to get all of this to come together by kneading it. It's just flour and water. There's no oil in here. This is not a bread dough. This is just making a dough ball. But kneading it is very important because we're separating the gluten from the starch. If I were just to take this and soak it into water, the whole thing would just turn into a paste and fall apart. And then I'd lose it all. Basically, I've just made starchy water that I couldn't really use for much. What we need to do is break or bring out the gluten in this dough, and that's done by kneading it. So I'll just keep this up, and when it gets to that point where it's all come together and it looks more like a dough, I'll show you what we've got. Okay. Actually, it's been about 6 minutes. I wasn't paying attention to the clock. Just getting a heck of a workout. It's not going to be pretty. It's a very, very dry, very dense dough ball. But all we were trying to do just now is get it all to come together, get all these little crumbs kind of incorporated into it, and get a semi-smooth mix to it. There aren't any floury parts and there aren't any like wet parts. It's all just mixed well together into this really dense dough ball. Okay, so now what we're going to do is just put it right back in the bowl, and I'm going to let it sit and rest for half an hour. So we're going to give it this 30 minutes to rest, and then we'll come back to it. And that's good because it's going to give me a chance to take a breather. Well, it's been a half an hour, so we're just going to take our dough ball out of the bowl and knead it for another 5 minutes. It's going to feel a little bit softer maybe than when you first put it in the bowl to rest. We're going to do another 5-minute knead on this, and then when it's done, we're going to put it back in the bowl and we're going to cover it with water, and I'll bring you back when we're at that point. Well, it's been another 5 minutes, and it's a lot smoother than it was the first time we kneaded it, but it's still very, very dense and very heavy. What I'm going to do next is kind of flatten it out a little bit because I want to make sure it's covered in water. I filled this bowl with cold water from the tap, and I'm just going to take the dough and submerge it in that bowl of water. And then we're going to put this in the fridge for 1 to 2 hours. It's probably going to be more like 2 hours for me. 1 hour is fine. If you let the time get away from you, not a big deal. 1 to 2 hours is good. Don't let it sit too much longer than that, or it'll start breaking down. All right, it's been about 2 hours. I took the dough out of the refrigerator, and now what we need to do is rinse it. And rinsing it is kind of like kneading it in the water. And I'll show you a close-up of me doing it. It's going to get messy. It's going to want to come apart. And we're just going to keep on massaging it and kneading it within the water and rinsing out as much of the starch as we can. And we're going to do that until the water comes almost clear. You'll see. So we'll bring this over to the sink and get that started. Okay, so you can see as I start kneading this in the water is going to start getting cloudy. And then it's going to go from being cloudy to being almost like a white paint. It's going to really get thick. When it looks like it's rinsed as much as it can because the water has become so cloudy and white, we're going to take that water and pour it off into a container. I have a 1 gallon like Tupperware bottle. I'm going to dump off the water into that because we're going to save our first bit of starch water to make bacon. And if you think, you know, how do I make bacon from this stuff? You'll see. But anyway, we're going to keep working this dough, and we're going to try to do this until, and then pour off the water, refill it with fresh water, continue kneading it. And we're going to do that until the water comes fairly clear. And I'll bring you back when we're ready to pour off the first batch. Okay, it's been about 3 minutes. And this is what our dough is starting to look like. You can see it's starting to kind of break apart. And it's starting to get very smooth in texture. And this is what our first batch what starch water looks like. It looks almost like milk. So what I'm going to do is pour this first batch off, because I want to keep the water that's most rich with starch. I'm going to pour this into our container and save it. I'm going to fill it with fresh water, and then we're going to continue on. All right, that got us about 3/4 of a gallon of starch water, and we're working on our second rinsing. And the water is gonna get cloudy, but not quite as white as that first batch. But we're gonna take, I got about 3/4 of a gallon, so I'm gonna take a little bit of this. We're gonna try to use this water until it doesn't look like it's getting any more white. Like I'm almost not getting any more starch out of the dough. I'm gonna pour some of this water into the container until I have about a gallon of starch water. And then from there, I'm just gonna rinse and repeat until the water is almost clear. And I can just throw away the water from that point. And it's not gonna have enough starch in it for us to use. So let me keep doing this. And I'll show you what it looks like when the water is clear enough. In other words, our gluten is ready to use. Okay, I'm on my third bowl of water. At this point, it's almost easier to use 2 bowls. I have my second bowl here. Because it's starting to really come apart, what I do when I'm ready to change the water out is I just pick up the gluten ball, squeeze out as much of the water as I can, put it in the other bowl, and that allows me to dump this out and then start again using the other bowl. And I just go back and forth. But I'm on my third bowl. And again, I spend maybe 2 to 3 minutes rinsing it. The water's going to get a little cloudy. And then I'm going to dump that water out. At this point, there's not enough of starch in the water to do anything with it. So you can just dump it down the sink or pour it outside. But I'm going to continue rinsing it. I'll probably have maybe 2 more rinses to go before it's ready. And I'll show you what the water looks like at that point. But after the second rinse, I finished filling up that gallon pitcher of starch water. I'm going to put that in the fridge. And I'm going to let it sit in the fridge overnight. This part here, the gluten ball, we'll be getting to the recipe right away today. The starch water, I'm going to let that sit in the fridge overnight. And that's going to separate. The starch is all going to sink to the bottom of the pitcher. And the water will just kind of float up to the top. We'll pour off a lot of that water when we're ready to use it. And it'll leave us with almost like a batter of starch. But that's for the second part of this project or recipe. So let me finish getting this rinsed. And when I'm on my final rinse, I'll let you know how many it took. And I'll show you what the water looks like that lets you know that it's good enough. Okay, it took about 4 rinses to get here. And I'm not sure how well this will show on the camera. But the water's cloudy. But it's not white. It's just a little bit cloudy. So I'm going to say our gluten at this point is rinsed enough. I don't want to take 100% of the starch out. You can kind of see the pieces that are like chunky, and stretchy, that's the gluten. And the pieces that are still kind of doughy, they look like silly putty. That still has some flour in it. And that's okay. It doesn't have to be 100%. Did I say that has flour in it? It still has starch in it. And it doesn't have to be 100% starch free. We just want to get the majority of the starch out. So we're left just with the gluten. Now I'm going to take this, transfer it over to my other bowl. Squeeze out as much of this water as I can. I have a mess to clean when I'm done. This does leave white, starchy mess. That's why I do this in the sink. It'll make it easier to kind of clean up my mess afterwards. But anyway, I'm going to get all of that out of the water, dump this water down the drain. I'll clean up my mess. I'm gonna get this gluten into a colander and I'll show you what it looks like. All right, I squeezed out as much water as I could from our gluten ball here. Just give it a little squeeze. I put it in a colander and I'm gonna let it sit in this bowl for another 30 minutes. And this is just gonna help, I'll just press this down a little bit. This is gonna help drain out some more of that water. We want it to be wet and easy to work with, but we don't want it to be drippy, soaking wet. Also, by letting it kind of drip dry in the colander here, it'll help the dough come back together a little bit and make it a little easier to work with. So we'll come back in about 30 minutes and we'll check on this and we'll turn this into pepperoni. Now that our seitan or gluten balls had a chance to thoroughly drain through the colander into this bowl, what I'm going to do is I'm going to pull it out of the colander here. I'm going to put it in a fresh bowl. And now we're going to start adding our seasoning mix to this. And basically what I'm going to do is I'm going to use a family recipe for pepperoni. I'm going to use the same seasonings. I'm going to add a few more just to give this more of a meat taste, because when you're making pepperoni, you're starting with real meat first. But I'm going to use basically the same recipes. I'll give you a nice close-up shot of my adding those, and I'm going to go over them fairly quick. The recipe, hopefully I'm going to have that uploaded to our webpage. If not, I'll have it down in the description. Okay, so let's get started. Okay, we're going to start with 2 teaspoons of salt, 2 teaspoons of black pepper, 2 teaspoons of crushed red pepper, 2 teaspoons of smoked paprika, 2 teaspoons of mustard powder, 2 teaspoons of garlic powder, 2 teaspoons of onion powder, 2 teaspoons of oregano, 2 teaspoons of sugar, 2 teaspoons of fennel, 2 tablespoons of tomato powder, and 2 tablespoons of beet powder. Okay, and those are our dry ingredients. Now for our wet ingredients, I'm going to add 1 teaspoon of soy sauce, 1 teaspoon of liquid smoke, and 2 tablespoons of cold coconut oil. And we're going to add that cold so it's still kind of chunky. All right, and now let's get dirty and start mixing this up. Okay, this is the messy part of this recipe. Getting your hands in and kind of turning all this and mixing it together. Now, some people use food processors to do all of this. I find that the dough in the beginning is way too dense to put into a mixer or food processor. It really needs to get done by hand. And this last part here, I suppose I could do in a food processor, a mixer, but no big deal. I don't mind getting into my food. But as you can see, it's all kind of getting incorporated into that gluten ball. But we want to continue doing this until it's thoroughly blended. And once that's done and it's all mixed up completely and all the way through, we don't have any pieces of the gluten that don't look like they're mixed. We don't have any pockets of hot pepper. Try to get all of that incorporated, and you can fold this and twist it and rip it and do what you need to do. Just get all this kind of blended evenly. And once that's done, I'll get back to you and I'll show you the next step. Okay, the next thing I'm going to do is divide our gluten ball here into either 2 or 3, depends on how big of a sausage you want to create. I think I'm going to do mine as 2, so I'm just going to break this in half, roughly. I've got 2 sheets of aluminum foil I already ripped. I sprayed one with a little non-stick spray. I used an olive oil spray. And I'm just going to lay this out like a log on the aluminum. And I want it to be about as big around as I want my pepperoni to be. And then I'm just going to roll it. The aluminum foil, in our case here, is going to take the place of your sausage skin. Normally you would pipe your sausage into a skin. We're going to roll ours into aluminum foil. Okay, just roll the ends in. Roll this up nice and tight. And once you have that rolled, you can kind of shape it, make sure it's around the right size for what your purposes are. I'm probably going to use ours on a pizza. Whoops. Spray the second one down. And just do that one more time. Once I get these rolled out, we'll move them over to the stove and I'll show you the next step. All right, the next step is I have a pot of water on the boil. The next step is to steam our little pepperoni sausages here. So I'm just gonna put those in a steaming basket. Put those in my pot, cover those, and these are gonna steam for 45 minutes. You don't have to roll them or flip them or anything. Just leave them in for 45 minutes. Make sure you have enough water. You don't want to run out of water before your time is up. I'm just going to set my timer. And wait 45 minutes. We'll be back as soon as those are done. Well, our 45 minutes is up and I've taken them out of the steamer. They're still pretty hot. And before I unwrap these, I'm going to put them in the refrigerator to cool down. Once they're cool, we can unwrap them, see what they look like, and you can either freeze them, use them right away, or refrigerate them for up to 2-3 weeks before they start getting weird. But let me put these in the fridge. I'll let them cool down. I'm probably just going to leave them there overnight, and I'll get to these in the morning. And then we'll also get to our starch because it'll be ready in the morning as well. So it's the next day. I pulled our faux pepperoni out of the fridge, and we'll be working also on that starch water when I'm done here. But they're cool and they've I don't want to say solidified, they harden up when they're cooked. But let's open one of these up and I'll show you what it looks like. All right, and then we'll cut it open and see what it looks like on the inside. Let me just clean this up a little bit. Okay, let's cut this in half. And I'll show you the inside. Okay, our coconut oil because we used it cold and because it had a chance to chill, kind of makes these little fatty bits, which kind of adds to the way it feels when you're eating it. I don't want to say mouthfeel, but I guess there's no other way to say it. Okay, and I'm going to slice a thin piece, like pepperoni on my pizza. Okay, let's give it a taste and see how it tastes. Not bad. A little bit spicy because of the crushed red pepper. Tastes pretty good. Again, it's not going to taste 100% like real pepperoni. It's not as greasy as real pepperoni. Real pepperoni is kind of oily. And this really isn't. But it has that same taste. It has the same flavors. This would be great on a pizza, or if you make sandwiches, like if you put it in a grinder, or however, you could slice this up and put it on crackers with cheese. Pepperoni is just one of the many things, like I was saying, that you can make with Seitan. I made it because we are all out of pepperoni. But if I wanted to make, let's say, a ham roll or a turkey roll or something like that for the holidays, it's a little more effort than other vegetarian recipes making this. But the outcome, the final products are amazing. Most people use it to make chicken. And you can kind of see why when we were working with that gluten ball, it almost had like a chicken look to it. It's very easy to make breasts of chicken or chicken strips or even make nuggets that you can batter, dip, and fry. But anyway, here's our pepperoni. Sounds like the dogs want some. Let me go grab the starch from the fridge and we'll move on to making some bacon. Well, I got our starch water out of the fridge and it looks like I've got a really good separation. I wish I had a clear picture that I could have used so that you could see the transition from the water down to the solids at the bottom. But what I'll do is I'll take this flashlight and just shoot it back here, and that way you can see where the water ends and where the solids are. So you can kind of get a picture of what's going on inside here. So let me just turn on the flashlight. Okay, and you should be able to see this dark band at the bottom. That's all the starch that settled, and everything above this right here, this is just water. So most of what we got here is water, a little bit of starch at the bottom. What I'm gonna do is pour off the majority of this water. Even if I pour off too much water, the stuff on the bottom is really gonna be very thick. We'll stir that up with a spoon. We want it to be the consistency of like a crepe mix, like a very watery pancake batter. And I'll show you that, but we'll pour off most of this water. We'll try to get our batter right, and then we'll get to making that bacon. Okay, I'm just gonna carefully pour off the water. Now the starch is so heavy at the bottom of this, it's not gonna stir up and try to pour out with this water until we get towards the bottom. So I'm just gonna do this slowly. And when we get towards the bottom, we'll be able to see it start to kind of like mix in with the water. And gotta get my head in the way here. And there it is, okay. So now we're down to the bottom where there's just a starch. I don't know if the camera can pick this up, but we're back to that really thick, milky liquid at the bottom. So this is what we're gonna be using. I'm gonna pour this off into 2 separate containers, and then we're gonna stir it all up and make sure it's at the right consistency. If it's too thick, we'll just add a little water. All right, I poured all of our starch water into this measuring cup here, and I used a strainer just to strain out any chunks of the Seitan that may have also came over with our starch. So with that strained off, let me just get rid of this. We have 2 cups of starch water. So I want to separate that in half. So I want to pour 1 cup into this measuring cup. And one of these is going to be the white of our bacon, sort of like the fatty strips that are in your bacon. And then the other part is going to be the meaty part, sort of the reddish or pinkish or brownish part of the bacon. So we're going to make 2 parts. They're going to be seasoned slightly different, and then we're going to pour those off and get those cooked up, and let's get started. Well, my starch is a little bit thinner than I would normally make it. I left a little too much water in it when I poured it off, but that's okay. Really what we're going to be doing it when we cook this is we're evaporating it. We're cooking it, but we're also evaporating the water out. So it may add a little bit more time to our cook time, but that's fine. So if it's a little thick or a little thin, those aren't deal breakers. So for our seasoning, what I'm going to do is 2 level teaspoons of salt. I'm going to do 1 teaspoon of liquid smoke. I'm going to do 1/2 teaspoon of garlic powder. I'm going to do 1/2 teaspoon of onion powder. And I'm going to do 1/2 teaspoon of black pepper. Let's get that stirred up. And this is, we'll call it the fatty part of our bacon. Okay, so now let's move on to the red part of our bacon, the meaty part of the bacon. That's seasoned slightly different. Plus we'll be adding beet powder to it just to give it that red color. Okay, let's get that half made. Okay, so for the other half of our bacon mix, we're going to do 1 tablespoon of soy sauce. Actually, it's 2 tablespoons of soy sauce. My memory isn't very good today. 1 tablespoon of maple syrup. I'll leave that in to stir. I'm going to do 1 teaspoon of smoked paprika, 1 teaspoon of beet powder. Actually, again, it's 2 teaspoons of beet powder and 2 teaspoons of smoked paprika. Then I'm going to do 1 teaspoon of salt and 1 teaspoon of liquid smoke. 1/2 teaspoon of black pepper, 1/2 teaspoon of onion powder, and 1/2 teaspoon of garlic powder. And let's get that all mixed up. Okay, and this will be the red or meaty part of our bacon. So once I get all this mixed up, I'll show you how to pour the bacon into the pan and how to get that cooked up. Okay, once you have your batters, I'll call it that, thoroughly mixed up, you want to make sure they're really blended. You don't want to have any like chunks in here. Okay, just use the wrong tool for the job. There we go. Just want to get as much of that out as I can. I'm going to spread this around in the bottom of my pan. Now I've got 2 cups in total of starch. So if you had, let's say, 1 cup of starch, you'd use a smaller pan. If you had 4 cups of starch, you might use 2 pans. What I did just to see what would fit in a pan is I just filled a measuring cup with water, poured it into my pan, and made sure that I had, if I put 2 cups of water in this pan, for instance, was it about as thick as I wanted to make my bacon? If it was too thin, I could use a smaller pan. If it was too thick, I'd use multiple pans. But then I just dried it out, pre-greased my pan, and I knew that what I'm working with is going to fit fine. So our first layer is just going to be the red. And then the idea with the white is just to randomly kind of dribble it in here. And you don't have to be an artist, and there's no right or wrong way to do this, but just kind of pour it in. And I'm kind of doing it in lines this way. Okay, and as you can see, it kind of gives you like a marbled look. So now after this cooks, when I slice it, I'll be slicing it this way, I'll kind of have that bacony look to it. Now we're not trying to recreate bacon. For any meat eaters out there, this does not taste like real bacon. The point of this is as a substitute. If I want to have a bacon, egg, and cheese sandwich without eating bacon, either because I'm a vegetarian, or I can't afford bacon, or I can't find bacon, or whatever the case may be, this will be my substitute. And it's made completely just using flour and some seasoning. I think the point behind a lot of our vegetarian dishes that people need to understand is you don't have to be a vegetarian. You just may want to cut back on costs or availability by making some kind of a substitute ingredient, and that's what we're doing. So now that I've got my pan filled, I'm going to put this in the oven. It's preheated to 350 degrees, and I'm going to cook that for approximately 10 minutes. But I'm going to check it every 5 minutes just to see if it's done. What you're looking for is it'll start pulling away from the edge of the pan and cracking just a little bit. That means it's done. You should be able to touch it and it'll still feel soft, but it'll be dry. You won't get any of that batter on your hands if you touch it. So take it out of the oven when it's at that point. Like I said, 10 minutes to 15 minutes, depending on the size of the batch. Just keep an eye on it. Another thing I want to talk about too, today's recipes are very high in gluten. Obviously, the pepperoni was made specifically from gluten. So if you have any kind of a gluten allergy, or you're on a diet where you avoid gluten, or you have celiac disease, not a recipe for you. Even the bacon was made from that same flour. I used all-purpose flour to make the bacon. I've never experimented with non-gluten flours like rice flours or any of that. So if you want to give that a shot to make the starch water for like bacon and for cold cuts and things like that, go ahead, give it a shot. Comment below if you've done it or if you're going to try it. I'd love to hear if that's an option. But today's recipe, everything's made with just regular flour. And as far as the gluten ball goes, you can't do that with a non-gluten flour using flour. I know that they make other ingredients that you can make a similar kind of Seitan with, but using what's called a washed flour method, you're using a gluten flour. But anyway, now that that's out of the way, we'll go check on our bacon, see what it looks like. And when it's done, I'll show you what you're looking for to see that it's done. And then we'll cut it up and I'll show you what it looks like. Okay, so we've taken this out of the oven and let it cool enough that I can touch it. And you can see how it cracks a little bit on this side, showing that it's done. It pulled away from the edge just a little bit. Also, when it's done, you should be able to carefully fold this over. It's going to break on me, but that's okay. it's done at this point, because this is what I would call uncooked fake bacon. When you're using this, you're still going to cook it traditionally like you'd normally cook bacon. You can put it in a frying pan and fry it up, or you can cook it in the oven, however you want to cook it. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to score it into bacon strips, just like this, like 1-inch strips. And I'm probably also going to cut it down the middle. I don't need them to be this long. Now, another thing that you can do too is you could use a cookie cutter. You can use an egg corral. You can cut out discs of bacon so that if you're making breakfast sandwiches or something like that, it's exactly the right size for how you're going to be using it. But that's totally up to you. But here is a finished piece of our vegetarian bacon. Okay, and what I'll do is slice all this up. When I'm done, I'll show you how I wrap it and store it. You can either freeze it or put it in the refrigerator, and then we'll give it a taste test and make sure that we did this right. Okay, now that I've got all this sliced up, what I'm gonna do is I cut a strip of parchment paper. I'm gonna take my bacon, lay that down, and I'm just gonna fold the parchment paper over the top. I'm going to put another piece down, and I'm going to fold the parchment paper back. Put another piece down, and I'm going to just keep doing this fan fold back and forth until I get all the bacon wrapped up. I'm probably going to do half of the bacon on one piece and the other half of the bacon on another piece of parchment paper. Then I'll put those into freezer Ziploc bags, and I can put these in the freezer. They don't take long to thaw out when you're ready to use them. I'll put one in the freezer, I'll put one in the fridge so it's ready to use. And maybe what I'll do while I'm doing all of this, I'll have Marilyn fry one of these up in a pan. That way you can see what a cooked piece looks like. And we'll give it a taste test. Well, we finished cooking the bacon and made some bacon, egg, and cheese sandwiches.
Yep, so I'm excited to be able to test the bacon. So we left one piece out, and I'll split it with Steve. Half for you, half for me. So it's nice and crispy on one side, the other side not quite as crispy. Probably could have cooked it a little bit longer, but let's see what it tastes like.
Tastes like vegetarian bacon. Now, Marilyn's acting like it's the first time she's tried this, and in a way it is. I'm constantly tweaking and updating recipes, trying, I'll say, well, maybe it needs a little more of this or a little more of that. I think this is pretty good. Could I do better? Maybe. I'm sure one of you out there might have a recipe that's better. If you want to put that down in the comments, I'd really like some good bacon. But it's pretty good. I'd compare this at least with like Morningstar Farm bacon, vegetarian bacon. It stores the same, it cooks the same, and it tastes very similar. A little saltier, but I like salty bacon. And maybe next time put in a little more maple syrup, because I do like a mapley bacon too. We could try honey. There's different things that you can try just to kind of change the flavor and make it your own. But I think the right amount of smoke, the right amount of salt for me.
Yep, and I agree. We used a little more of the liquid smoke in this batch than we had previously. So this was, I think, perfect. The other thing that I like about making the bacon or cold cuts or whatever out of that starch water is it's less waste. And it saves us a little bit more money at the grocery store, which is always important. Now, when I cooked these, I did put some oil in the bottom of the pan because this is a bacon substitute. It doesn't have the same kind of grease that a normal bacon would have. If you've ever cooked a Morningstar bacon or something like that, you're already familiar with the fact that
it's very dry.
Yeah, you want to put a little bit of oil in the bottom of your pan first. If you're going to cook it in the oven, make sure you spray your pan. And then a trick to make sure both sides get nice and crispy is just, if you're using like an olive oil spray, spray a little bit on top of the bacon as well. So in the oven, both sides crisp up. Even if you flip it, it's a good idea. So love this. Think it tastes awesome. Can't wait to eat our sandwiches.
Now, the other thing I like about making bacon or making cold cuts, because you also make this into, I've made like a Canadian bacon, like a ham. I used an egg corral to kind of cut out round pieces, almost like cold cuts. So it was perfect for a sandwich. And I'm sure depending on how you season it, you can make different types of cold cuts with it. But what I like about using the starch, in the past, I never liked making seitan because to me it was a waste. I used 6 cups of flour and I got the equivalent of maybe 3 cups of gluten to make sausage or to make salami or to make pepperoni like we did in this video. And the rest of it just went down the drain because I'm not a fan of starch noodles. And I didn't think that you could make anything else with the starch. So now knowing that I can use the starch to make other things, such as like bacon or whatever, I feel a lot more, I feel better that I'm using more of that 6 cups of flour out of my, my pantry. You know, a lot of the vegetarian things that we make aren't necessarily for the same reason other people are vegetarians. We like to use what's in our pantry and what we can store long term to either extend meat or to replace meat in recipes. The prices of meat are going up, and I'm sure the powers that be would like you to not even be able to buy meat or raise meat. So having alternatives like this so that you don't have to, you'll never replace the flavor and the proteins that you get from consuming meat. But if you want to make a recipe that requires meat, you know, if I want spaghetti and meatballs and I can't get ground beef, I need to know how to make those substitutes. And it's the same thing with bacon or with pepperoni. I mean, nothing beats a pepperoni pizza. But if I can't get pepperoni, I need to know how to make it. And making it from flour, water, and some seasoning, you know, it's kind of a no-brainer. It's a great way to use your pantry items.
Yeah, and something that I do want to try with the bacon is I want to take a few pieces in the next batch of freeze drying I do. I want to try freeze drying it and then breaking it up and see how that works out as bacon bits. So it would be another potential item to have and be able to keep on the shelf long term. It would also allow it potentially to last even longer for us.
Right. Anyway, we're going to eat lunch. Hope you like the video. If you like content like this, leave a comment below. If you've got Seitan recipes or other ways to use your pantry items to kind of extend your meat or to replace your meats, go ahead and comment below. We'd love to hear what you have to say. Share it with your friends if you know somebody who would like to try to use what they have in the pantry. And aside from that, I guess I'll see you in the next video.
Bye.
Bye.